Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second panel of this morning in the pipeline, Mexico's natural gas sector. My name is Alberto de la Peña. I'm a partner at Haynes & Boone in the Dallas office. I'm a member of the Mexico practice group of the firm. So we have this morning a great panel, I will say a AAA panel, and I'm very pleased to be the moderator of the panel to discuss a very important area in the energy reform, which is natural gas. As you know, natural gas, as has been discussed, is essential for the Mexican economy, is essential for North America, is essential for the industry in Mexico and the manufacturing, but it also has a binational component. As you know, the U.S. is the largest supplier of natural gas to Mexico, and unlike oil, the natural gas is supplied via pipelines. So we have several cross-border pipelines. Having an efficient natural gas market is essential for the competitiveness of Mexico. In the last report of the World Economic Forum on competitiveness, Mexico moved up 4 ranks in 1 year, and now it occupies the position 57 out of 140 countries. One of the reasons Mexico was able to move so quickly was because of the structural reforms of the Mexican government, which include the energy reform. Obviously, there are a lot of challenges ahead, particularly in all the sectors in the energy, but particularly in gas, and some of which are going to be discussed this morning. So the format for our panel, I'm going to introduce our speakers. Then each of them will give a brief opening remark, and we are going to have a discussion followed by a Q&A session from the audience. So without further ado, let's start with our speakers. David Madero. David graduated from ITAM, Instituto Tecnológico Autónomo de Mexico, with a master's degree in economics and PhD degree from University of California in LA. He has been more than 20 years member of the federal government, and since August 2014, he has held the position of managing director, or I will say CEO, of the National Control Center for Natural Gas since its creation. Before his appointment as managing director, David has worked in the Treasury Department in Mexico, as well as the National Development Bank for Infrastructure and the Ministry of Energy. While at the Ministry of Energy, he was responsible to oversee upstream, midstream, and downstream oil and gas activities, and his experience allowed him to be a member of the board of directors of Pemex. Welcome, and thank you for being here, David. Next, Efraín Telles. Efraín Telles, he holds a degree in actuarial science and master's degree in economics. He has worked in the energy sector for over 20 years, and he's a specialist in the industrial organization, economic regulation of monopolies, markets, and competition promotion in the energy sector. Before May this year, he held the position of head of the regulatory unit at the Regulatory Energy Commission, and there he was responsible for designing the economic regulatory framework and coordinating the Commission's participation in the development of public policy in the energy sector. After May this year, he founded Enix, a consulting firm formed by a group of experts in the energy sector. Next, welcome Efraín, and thank you for being here. Adrián Dujalt is a non-resident scholar for the Baker Institute Mexico Center, and he is also an associate professor at the Universidad de las Américas Puebla, where his teaching focuses on economic geography, corporate strategy, and energy issues in North America. His main research here at the Mexico Center is related to the dynamics of energy in North America and their effect on the petrochemical value chains, agricultural productivity, and food dependency in Mexico. Welcome, and thank you for being here, Adrian. And last but not least, my friend Hunt Buckley. Hunt is a senior counsel at Haynes & Boone in Mexico City office. Hunt has over 30 years of experience in the energy sector, representing a variety of transnational companies in Mexico, Latin America, and other jurisdictions, in upstream, downstream, and all kind of transactions. He has been recognized as a leading attorney in the energy sector by the Latin American Corporate Counsel Association, and he's also a member of the Association of International Petroleum Negociators. Please help me to welcome our speakers. David?
How can we have this map that here go up there?
Oh.
What do I have to do?
Do you know how to put it up? There's a clicker in there. Right there. Which one? No, but it is.
It's here, but it's not there.
Okay, they'll come out in a second. Okay.
Okay, well, we'll have a map, and it's always good to have maps when you talk about pipelines. I want to thank Haynes and Boone and the Baker Institute at Rice University for inviting us here and holding this great meeting. I want to tell you that Mexico is in a massive expansion of natural gas transportation. We're building pipelines in a way which never had, at the speed at which we never had before. And we are laying the foundations too for efficient markets in regulation. All thanks to the energy reform which was put forward in 2013 and in the legal reforms of 2014. The country is also committed to a broad liberalization of natural gas prices and the way we sell transportation services. And we're right in the middle of that. And if you follow the Mexican energy sector, we're right at that point, where we are going to give all of those who want capacity in the national system the possibility of buying their transportation services in firm capacity. And that includes giving Pemex and CFE certain capacity in the pipelines and then holding an open season, and we're doing all of that in the last quarter of this year. Senegas has a central role in all of these changes. It started as an idea in the energy reform when the legislature decided that they wanted to break up the vertical integration that Pemex had for many, many years as the sole company who would produce, process, transport, commercialize gas in Mexico. And that allowed, yes, we'll go back to the map at the end. Thank you very much. That allows the idea that the legislature had says, let's create a new state-owned enterprise separate from Pemex and give them the national pipelines. 9,000 kilometers, that's 5,400 miles of pipelines, 9 compressor stations, and the responsibility of every day moving roughly 5 BCFs around Mexico was transferred from Pemex to Senegas. Aside from that, Senegas was also given several responsibilities as a technical system operator. And a technical system operator in natural gas is not something that's common in North America. It's an experience that has been done in Europe, but in the North American setting, neither Canada nor the United States have a government entity which acts as a technical system operator. The technical system operator at Senegas is therefore being created from scratch and has the first responsibility of providing a clear planning exercise, a 5-year plan which is updated every year, and which is what results in this plan that we have here, in this map. What you can see there is all the gray pipelines that you see there are the historical pipelines that we inherited. Then we have dotted pipelines which are being built right now. We have the green pipelines which are already awarded projects which are being built at this moment. And then we have some other projects which are currently under tendering and will be started to tender early in 2017. A project going from Jaltipan to Salina Cruz, that's on the, yes, on the narrowest part of Mexico, going from the Atlantic or from the Gulf Coast to the Pacific in Salina Cruz. That's a pipeline which would make a lot of sense if we have revamping of the refinery that we have today at Salina Cruz. and that would allow us to have more gas to gasify this part of Mexico, which is the Chiapas border, going all the way to the Chiapas border on the Pacific Ocean, which is where we have the biggest challenges in terms of economic development. We also have the possibility, and we'll start tendering at a pipeline going from Lázaro Cárdenas, which is another industrial port, to Acapulco on the coast of Guerrero, which is, together, again, one of the states which has the biggest social challenges. We also not only provide the planning and offer the opportunity, we have to tender out these transportation and storage projects when the Energy Ministry deems them as strategic or social projects. And finally, we have to take a role as an operator for our own pipelines, plus all of those pipelines which have been included as part of our system. Not all of the pipelines being built in Mexico will be part of the system or are not yet, to be clear, today, part of the system. But what is part of the system is everything that was gray, plus the Ramones project coming directly from South Texas into central Mexico. And that's a very important project that is allowing Mexico at the end of this year, for the first time, to have enough gas to say that we're covering the whole demand of the national necessity. I would just like to say that going back to our role as a transportation company, we're relatively big because we have 9,000 kilometers of pipelines, but we're not the biggest one in terms of investments. Our pipelines are 36 years old on average, and therefore need a lot of maintenance. And our biggest challenge there is to be efficient. Efficiency in gas transportation means that the regulated tariffs can be lower, and if we can achieve that, then we are clearly putting the foundations for a more productive Mexico. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much to the Baker Institute and Haynes & Boone for inviting me this morning. I don't have a presentation, but I'd like to start saying you that for the last 20 years, I've been spending my professional life in the energy sector, basically at the Energy Regulatory Commission, and I lived 4 attempts to reform the sector. 2 of them just in the paper because never passed the office at the Sener or CRE or whatever. The third one was in 2008, and it was from my point of view the main way to learn that this kind of reforms should be done in a very high spectrum. In the 2008 reform, we learned that the sector should be opened, that to achieve competition, it is not enough just to put it in the law, in the bylaws, but actually admit new participants, and that is what is going on right now in the particularly in the natural gas sector, which is, even though we don't have a really competitive market, it is the most developed market in Mexico in the energy sector. Unlike the electric or the liquids markets, since 95, every dollar that has been spent in building new infrastructure has been put it in the market by the private sector. So it is the market where it is the more developed market in Mexico, even though we still need to go ahead with some missing regulations. The Senegas is working really hard along with the CRE and the Energy Ministry to establish all the remaining steps that we need to bring competition, but as I see, we are just 2 steps behind to have a new, really competitive market of natural gas in Mexico. So that will be my first comments on this.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I want to start by thanking Tony Payan and the Baker Institute for the invite, and also Haynes and Boone. It's a great honor to be here. And what I would like to say is that having a functional market with respect to natural gas is a must for Mexico. But also what we need to do is to make sure that this commodity helps increase productivity and has an impact on manufacturing. If Mexico fails to do so, we can question the impact and the benefits of the energy reform. And well, my participation is going to be in that sense, because I think that Mexico is about to experience a golden age of natural gas, and the conditions are, well, this thanks to a combination of factors. Probably the most important one is the expansion of the pipeline infrastructure in Mexico, but also the fact that here in the U.S. Production of natural gas is, well, at high levels, and there is a glut in this market. So shale gas producers in the U.S. need to export or to find new markets for the natural gas. And in Mexico, demand is increasing. It's not only coming from electricity generation, where the CFE is like using more natural gas for power generation, but also some industrial centers in Mexico are demanding or are going to demand more natural gas, like the car making industry, chemicals, and so on. So the natural gas is going to have an impact on a bigger economic landscape in Mexico. And at the end of the day, that's going to help increase, well, energy integration between Mexico and the rest of North America, but also it's going to help to make this region more productive in comparison to other manufacturing regions in the world.
Welcome all. Is this on? No? How do you turn it on? It is? Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for being here, and thanks to the Baker Institute, Tony Payan, for putting this great group together. Let's talk about context for 1 second. What has Mexico done in its brief history of opening of these markets? Started in mid-2013, and we're barely 2.5 years later, okay? We've done, or Mexico has done, I think, in 3 years, what took the United States over 50 to accomplish. Let's start again. We had the FPA in the 50s, we had the FCPA, we had a regulated interstate market. It took the valentry and the valor of a Reagan to undo some of this stuff, and it still took 30 years for us to reach today's position in these markets. Mexico is trying to do this in 3 years, okay? To say that this is a Herculean task is putting it very, very mildly. And by the way, I do have extra minutes available for the rest of the crowd, so I thought we'd do an open season. How about that? Okay. Let's start the bidding up. But it's an extraordinary event. Now, obviously, you're going from a very difficult premise, which is a controlled, centralized market, 2 players in the market, to something different. How do you do that? How do you break up the monopoly? How do you make the transition work? It's a very, very difficult proposition, and obviously there are hiccups. But there are some principles that guide the process. For example, especially in the gas and the pipeline arena, open access, non-discrimination, and the basic playing field for everybody. How do you convert that into words? That means you either over-regulate and engage in pettifoggery, which is, I hate to say it, sometimes an inclination in this country, or you leave the authority with more power than you might as a lawyer like them to have, okay? And that is reflected to some degree in these regulations that are coming out as we speak. For example, on the pipeline side, your contracts are regulated. You have an adhesion contract. You, as a user of the system, engaging a transporter, really don't have a lot of wiggle room for negotiation. This is not a NASB world quite yet, okay? That eventually, at least the principle, is that eventually, once you've established a sufficient base of competitive dealing and fair play, that then parties can divorce from the system and go to something else. At least that's there in principle. You'll see other examples of the CRE regulating aspects of your contract, regulating aspects of your operations, because they need to. Otherwise, I don't think you'll ever get there. Remember that for our pipeline system to have existed, we required natural monopolies. Concessions from the government said, you have the right exclusively to move this gas from point A to point B under a tariff system. Bit by bit, we've kind of divorced ourselves from that process. In Mexico, you'll see some of those elements working in a different context, a very parallel one, but very similarly. For example, I already mentioned contracts. Another is, what gas can I move? I can buy capacity, but I can't broker it, okay? If I don't use it, I lose it. And if I have excess capacity, I must offer it to the market, okay? These principles together really start setting up, I think, a potentially viable platform for this experiment. But time will tell. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Juan. Thank you, everybody. I have a question for the panel. I mean, it was mentioned, what we need in Mexico to create a real open market, an efficient market. It was mentioned, no discrimination, open access. I would like to ask the panelists, what other factors or elements are required to create that open market? And then how the regulations that have been issued so far by the authorities can help to achieve or not to achieve that target. So I don't know who would like to take the lead first. David?
I'll take it.
Thank you.
I think that the first thing that we have to accept is that these markets will not work well if they're not regulated. And you not only need an economic regulator, you need an economic regulator which will fully be capable of being technically advanced and understand where the problems are. And the biggest problem, of course, is that these are large investments with fixed investments and very dependent on geography. So you need to create an economic regulator, and that Mexico did 20 years ago. And that's the CRE, and the CRE has been evolving. You need this economic regulator to be strong. And I think throughout the reforms of 2008 and 2013, we've been strengthening the regulator, and that will create a regulator which will have the capacity technically and legally to impose itself where it has to do so. On the other hand, what the reform in Mexico is trying to do is trying to acknowledge that there are certain externalities, which I would call let's just say network externalities, call them network externalities. So even though they're a little bit different from the ones you usually would see in other type of networks. But here you have congestion problems. And if you have congestion problems, then having a technical system operator might be a very good solution. And that's what is intended there on one part of Senagas being created as a technical system operator. On the other side, the technical system operator has this role as planning, as a 5-year planner, and somebody who has to foresee what's the optimal way of evolving in the national grid. And that's I think the legislator that there has this traditional Mexican way of thinking that centralized things will work better. We have to use decentralized power to guide the market, but then we have to, at some point, we'll have to start loosening up and allow the market to do everything that it wants to do, because markets usually know better than central planners. And finally, I would say that, of course, there is always the regulation needed on terms of safety standards. The private company, even the public company, would probably like to be less stringent on safety than what it should be, and therefore we've created another regulator, which nobody talked here about, but is a particular regulator for safety and environmental standards for the oil industry. And I think that fully completes What we have in Mexico, I think, is a full package of regulations needed. What we need now is time to implement this, and as Hunt said very clearly, only time will tell. There are so many obstacles and hurdles in the way that we have to jump before we get.
Speaking about ASEA, which is the environmental, they just issued regulations 2 days ago, and they're pretty comprehensive on pipeline design, layout, safety regulations, security, et cetera, et cetera. So those of you who are looking at this market, you need to read this. It's very thin.
Yes, I will say that it will take, the actions are divided in two fronts, let's say. The first one is the very concrete regulations and the way it will be implemented to establish the rules to enter into the market and to operate into the market. Some of those rules are already issued. They are in place, obviously from the constitutional amendments to the, I never know how to translate disposiciones generales administrativas de carácter general, but
Regulations.
The main regulations, yes. I put the Google translator and it appears something that I don't understand well. Some of those regulations are already in place. Some of them are missing. I was starting saying that David Madero, Senagas, the CRE are working hard on that. For example, the rules to use the capacity in the integrated system, which is for me the only remaining rules that we need or you need to enter into the Mexican market. Because even though we still have this dominant player that is Pemex, I think that all the gas that comes to Mexico from the USA's already become from a very competitive market. So we only need to get rid of this intermediate agent, which is Pemex, to bring those original competitive conditions to the market. And for that we need, the players need to have access to the system, to the pipeline system. On the other hand, we need something more esoteric, like, for example, to have confidence on the Mexican market. David said something very important. You need to be confident that the regulators are doing their job well, that they are experienced regulators. And David and Hunt mentioned the ASEA. I will add to this set of institutions one that is very, very important, which is the Comisión Federal de Competencia Económica, the antitrust regulator in Mexico, which is the strongest one among all the institutions that participate in this market. And from the first hand, I know that they are really interested in having competition in this market, and they have powers to do so. And then, as part of this strategy to develop this market, the authorities designed this contract gas release program that should be done by Pemex. And this has two phases. I mean, Pemex itself, which will put in the table all the set of contracts that they have today, and on the other way, you have the users. and the users should have confidence on the new players that they will deliver the gas, that they will deliver it competitively, and from the new players will need to be confident that the users will honor their contracts. And in this analysis, it shouldn't be missed the creditworthiness of the Mexican users, which is something that also we never talk enough on this matter, because right now the credit conditions that Pemex establishes on their clients not necessarily meet the common practice in this kind of markets. Even so, as I said before, also I think we are only, I said 2 steps. I will correct myself, and I will say we are only 1 step behind to have this new competitive and efficient natural gas market in Mexico.
Thank you. I have just one comment on, Adrian, you were talking about the golden age, the potential golden age for Mexico in natural gas. As you know, I was looking the other day at the forecast on the government figures on the demand and supply of natural gas. The internal demand will continue growing, but the supply, at least in the short term, the domestic supply will not increase, right? So it will continue depending on imports, particularly from the States, which I think, for Mexico is an important market for them. So I think the question is whether, first of all, is that golden age achievable? Is that something that we can get to? What does that mean? And also, as the Mexican market grows, will that affect that U.S. market that is supplying to the U.S., or it will just enrich the North American region? Could you elaborate a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's
on
going
that?
to make North America more competitive and the supply of natural gas in here. And well, in Mexico, I think there are some conditions set for having for natural gas to have a golden age. And well, demand is there, and also the government is worried about creating more demand centers, like in the south of Mexico, with this policy related to special economic zones, where pipelines are projects to be built there. So, and one of the questions, for example, I asked to my students at the University of the Americas is, how can you actually industrialize the south of Mexico when there is no infrastructure, to supply different energy sources like natural gas? And that is something the Mexican government is aware of. And in what Efrain was saying with respect to users having confidence in the supply, that's true, at least for industrial users in some regions in Mexico. For example, where I come from, in Puebla, you can see that demand is increasing, not only through the manufacturing plant of Volkswagen, but also Audi. Audi is starting operations in Puebla quite soon, and obviously they are demanding more auto parts made out of plastics. And for that, you need, one of the things you need is natural gas. So on the one hand, in some industrial regions, you are having more demand from car makers, but on the other, there is going to be a greater supply of natural gas. So every player like in the middle of these extremes may benefit from this situation, and that is being replicated in different regions in Mexico, not only in Puebla, in central Mexico, in the north of Mexico. And with the construction of pipelines, a golden age is possible in the case of Mexico.
It's interesting, talking about manufacturing. For every dollar that Mexico exports to the U.S., 40 cents has North American content. As to each dollar that the China exports to Mexico has just 4 cents of American content. So that's, I think, how interrelated, and obviously the supply is very important. I would like to.
I want to address something that Adrian. If you look at the 5-year plan, there's the implicit recognition that it's going to take some time before Mexico develops its own natural gas resources. I mean, that's fairly clear. You're looking at export lines. All you have to do is look at the pipeline system, and it's clearly driven to importing the 3 BCF deficit, or whatever it is right now, at least for the next 4 or 5 years, right? How long do you think it will take for the E&P side to begin to catch up? I mean, we're already running into experiences where, because of the absence of markets, that we've only been able to deal with the incumbent, and the incumbent doesn't really know what to do because it's a different situation for them. It took a while to get a contract done, in other words. In a lot of these areas, you don't have a lot of infrastructure. I don't see these lines including the gathering systems, laterals, and everything else that needs to go to the production fields. How is that going to fit into the picture, guys?
Yes. Well, why don't I take it, since the 5-year plan ultimately lies within my collaborators. We have and it's interesting to say it here in Texas, because I don't know how often do Texans really understand that we're already bringing in about 4 BCFs of gas into Mexico, 4 BCFs every day into Mexico from the United States. And we are expecting demand to grow 0.5 BCF per year, and we are anticipating that domestic supply will not grow, or maybe even fall, about 0.1 every year for the next 4 years. So all in, that means that every year we need 600 million cubic feet of additional gas per day coming into Mexico. And that's why we're building this pipeline grid, so that we can bring more gas from Mexico. We're expanding incredible amounts, the amount of gas that we can bring into Mexico. And then the big challenge for us is to bring that gas from northern Mexico into central and western Mexico. And we believe the 5-year plan, as it is today, will allow us by 2019 for the first time to be fully safe in terms of gas security, that we will be able to bring all of this gas. But the big question is then, when will domestic supply come back again? And I think we have to separate the problem. And that's a problem that's being dealt with through these auctions that are being carried out by Comisión Nacional de Hidrocarburos. We believe that E&P projects usually take 6 or 7 years to come online. I believe that there are certain mature oil fields which can be revamped and could probably give us some gas before that. But at the end, today, the energy reform in Mexico is saying we'll let the private sector and profitability determine how much gas we can produce in Mexico. And in the meanwhile, yes, we're going to be increasing the amount of imports from the United States. And we want, if possible, to bring in all of the gas from the United States, because when we have to bring in LNG, that's considerably more expensive, roughly $3 or $4 per BCF more expensive than gas. So today it's about twice the price of the continental gas. So this integration between Mexico and the United States is an amazing opportunity to increase our imports and to create the prosperity that we need to create the whole region to prosper.
David, now you're talking about that. Could you tell us what are the main challenges that the Senagas is facing based on the dual role of being the technical operator of the system and the larger transporter, at least in size, not in investment, but including something you mentioned that some of the pipelines are 36 years old.
Yes, there's many challenges, and I would start by saying that on the technical system operator, which is this new role, the biggest challenge is to work together with the regulator to create a whole set of regulations that we need. And Efrain is very optimistic, saying that we're just one step behind, but this is like Achilles and that turtle, that famous idea where we're always one step behind, but we never really catch up. And we have to do a lot of work still on that side. We have to ensure open access. We have to make sure that the whole transportation in our system is completely non-discriminatory, and that will increase the potential. But there's a big challenge which is a little bit outside of Senagas, which is the challenge of the commercializers. We don't want a model where Pemex is in charge of bringing 5 or 6 or 7 BCFs into Mexico every day. We don't want that to be Pemex and CFE. We want it to be the market that brings gas in the most efficient way into Mexico, because that's what we need. And that means creating the opportunity for other companies to bring in gas into Mexico, but it also means creating a competitive environment so that people can commercialize gas within Mexico at competitive terms. And that whole regulation is still pending too. I think there's a lot to be done on that side. Senagas, I think I already talked about the challenge of increasing the accuracy with which we can see the future. We know we're economists, so we know we're always wrong when we try to look at the future. But we also know that if we do things better, we'll be less wrong than if we do things in a sloppy way. So having an agency or a team of people who can focus on actually estimating what demand is going to be, where it's going to be, and what type of pipelines we need to bring into the country should help us to put order into this. So we have a technical challenge there too. And as a transportation company, the challenges are huge because, as I said, the pipelines are old, the compressors need to be revamped. So we need about $1 billion pesos per year to be invested in our infrastructure. Plus, we need to deal with all of the repairs and the integrity problems that the pipeline system of this age has. So the challenges are huge, and we have to do this in an efficient way. If we can do it efficiently, we'll be able to offer our stakeholder, our owners, the federal government, a return on equity, and that's a big challenge. And we're doing that in the first semester of the year. We're very sure that we're going to finish this first year with a profit. That's very different from the rest of the energy sector, state-owned enterprises in Mexico. The challenge is to keep that up and to maintain this possibility of not only being a company which solves an economic problem, but also a company which gives a return to its stakeholders.
Who's going to provide the maintenance to the pipelines, the 9,000 kilometers you receive from Pemex? Is it going to be Pemex under Underservice Agreement, or is it going to be
nosotros, we're going
Okay.
We're going to do that. We currently are working. The only way to transfer a company from one place to another was to sign all sorts of contracts with Pemex. So we signed 8 contracts with Pemex. We signed an operation and maintenance contract, but we also signed financial services, legal services, regulatory services, every type of service that you can think, so that we could actually transfer the company from one place to another before we had the staff to run this thing. In these 2 years, we've been staffing up Senagas. We're roughly about 200 professionals today at Senagas. We're doing all of the administrative jobs. We're still doing the operation and maintenance through Pemex. Operation, because the SCADA system, which we already started building, takes about 1.5 years to get the SCADA system for this type of pipeline grid. And the maintenance, because the only way to have thousands, hundreds of people, maybe thousands in the case of Pemex, more than 1,000 people on the whole national geography to give the services to us. We're walking away from that in an orderly way, and that it has a lot of negotiations between us and Pemex, of course, but we are walking away. Starting next year, we'll be doing the investment on our system with third-party companies.
Is that true also for Sistragas, or is that a regime going to be a little bit different?
No, Sistrangas it's the name that's been given in legal terms to the whole system. And that's very important for people to understand is the system is our pipelines plus Ramones plus a Tamaulipas pipeline plus a couple of pipelines going into central Mexico. But it's not the whole national pipeline system or the whole national grid of pipelines. In our pipelines, we will be dealing with maintenance in our pipelines, but the Ramones pipeline will be maintained by the company which owns it.
But if that pipeline, though, is deemed strategic, correct? Which means that, at least from what I've read, it goes into the
it's part of
it goes into your bucket,
and
you're the manager.
And today we charge the tariffs, systemic tariffs in the whole country, and we pay out the people at Ramones.
So you manage, but you don't operate.
We don't have to operate them on the field. Okay. That's right.
So, one of the, and I'm going to just try to wrap up something we have been discussing here. The 3 main strategies of the Ministry of Energy to promote the market is 1, public market information. There will be available means of, volumes and sales and pricing. 2nd, reservation of capacity and open access that has been mentioned here. And finally, commercialization. Creating competition in commercialization, which, as Efrain mentioned, I think the plan is that Pemex, in the next 4 years, will transfer 70%, I think, right, of the commercialization agreements Pemex has. I think the question I have for the panel is, in the second item, the reservation of capacity and open access, we have 2 important subjects. 1 is the open season, that I think we will benefit from information about, when it's coming, what are going to be the requirements, And then also, what Senegas is going to do to assure or to try to keep open access. Do you want to start? And
yes,
then,
I'll start.
Yeah.
I have the private information on that, I guess. We're very well advanced talking to CRE on the terms and conditions for the open season that we're going to hold. The next thing that you will see first is CFE will determine how much capacity will be given to Pemex and CFE. After that, we still have to honor some people which had capacity, because about 1.6 BCFs already had capacity in our system. And we've also already went public and gathered all the information on people which were granted grandfather rights, I guess, or acquired rights because they had been using the system. And in 2008, 2009, and 2010, Pemex had been issuing these letters where they gave some type of right for people. And we've done already that. You will see in the next weeks how much is given to Pemex and CFE. And then in the last quarter of the year, we will be holding the open season. Now, the big question is, what are going to be the conditions? How are you going to do it? We can't tell right now because we're still working with the CRE, and the CRE has to give us its approval. So we're still under negotiations in order to make this work. But we clearly think that given that Mexico is expanding its capacity right now with the entrance of Ramones is already working the whole project. It's transferring 2.1 BCFs in the northern border and actually putting more than 0.4 at the central Mexico every day. But when it's in full capacity, it will be able to it will double that, its capacity to push gas into central Mexico at roughly about 1 BCF. When we have that working by the end of in the last quarter of the year, we will have enough capacity so that everybody will be served, hopefully. The details we can't share today.
Okay. Do you have any other comment on that, or okay?
Could we address how the tariff system is going to work?
Yes. We have a tariff system today, and we inherited that when we got the whole Sistrangas and the system. It's a tariff system which has geographical zones, one of which is too big, which is the Gulf zone. And on general terms, I think it's not a tariff system designed to be competitive against other pipelines which will be competing against us. So we'll be modifying probably next year the way we charge tariffs in order to bring in some more modern tariffication scheme, which will allow us not to lose competitivity, particularly close to the border.
Okay. As I understand, there are going to be deregulation of the first-hand sales in the northern part of the region in the country beginning January 2017. Does the panel has any comment as to how that's going to advance the market that we would like to share?
Sure. At least what I've seen in this strategy that has been published by the Energy Ministry, the idea is to deregulate the first-hand sales price gradually, beginning in the border. Right now, one of my main works at the CRE was precisely the regulation of first-hand sales. And I can tell you that no formula, even the complicated you want to make it, will reflect the dynamics of the market. So for me, the best way to regulate is deregulating the price when in those markets where you can bring competition. When we was discussing how to regulate Pemex's prices, we discussed mainly two visions at the CRE. One was a strategy in which you allow Pemex to charge a very high price in order to incentivize other players to bring their gas, and the Pemex will be regulated by the market. The other vision was this formula that is in place now, which is I don't know if you know it. It is based on a very sophisticated econometric model that, in my view, still constitutes a barrier to new entry, the entry of new players. So, from my point of view, what the series should analyze is how this price regulation avoids or stops being an entry barrier for new players. I think that it will be a challenge because, in one hand, you want to bring competition, but in the other, if competition doesn't appear, you don't want Pemex to have extra money just because there's no competition. So the CRE will challenge. Will face the challenge of finding an equilibrium between regulating the price to Pemex and that regulation allows new participants to come to the market. And the country, I think, is divided. In the border, you can bring competition very quickly, and that's what I think. We only need to have entry to the system, but there's a point where the imported gas doesn't reach the market, and it is satisfied with national production. And that price should be regulated. And another challenge that the CRE will face is which is that point? Which is the level, if you see the country, how much kilometers you go down to deregulate the price, and from down to up, how much do you need to regulate the Pemex price and make compatible both prices at the arbitrage point? So it is a challenge. I think that the CRE is working on that. I don't know really which are the status of those analyses.
Thank you, Efrain. I don't know if anyone in the panel has any other comment before we go to Q&A. I don't know if someone in the audience has any question that would like to ask our panelists. Yeah. You can come to the microphone, please. Yeah, good.
My name is David Hamilton. I work for Vega Energy here in Houston, Texas. I was curious, one of the issues we have in America right now is we have a lot of non-ratable power generation demand coming on, and we have ratable pipelines trying to meet that demand. How do you see managing the swings in the system as you have more power generation coming on? Are you increasing storage, or how do you manage that kind of expectation in non-ratable flow?
Yes, today we don't have storage and we have a tight system, and what we're doing is building up a lot of pipelines which will allow us to have a more flexible system, but still not storage. If you see our 5-year plan, there's still no storage. Mexico never felt the need for storage, mainly because I think prices were regulated and they were reflecting Henry Hub volatility, not Mexican volatility for natural gas, where the consumption point is. And I believe that at some point in the future, the conditions will be there for the market to create storage in Mexico. If the demand becomes more volatile, then that creates more incentives for prices will fluctuate more widely, and then the demand for storage will be there. In the meantime, what Senagas has done, because it part of its obligation, it has to try to generate gas security at the end. That's the end purpose, is we are paying a consultant, the Mexican Institute of Petroleum, together with some Texan consultants, to analyze the whole geological information in Mexico and the business case in order to point out which are the places where underground storage would make more sense. And then we're going to try to push the ministry to determine that those storage projects are strategic so that we can bid them out, tender them.
I think congratulations on the panel. Of the discussion was excellent. The question I have is obviously moving to a market system, and then the question of national security for Mexico natural gas. Maybe the answer it relates to the analysis that that you yourself as an economist and the team that you've developed and your third-party experts are helping you with. But the question the specific question I have is, as you've analyzed through the demands on natural gas coming from the United, obviously Texas and Mexico are natural partners in this. I mean, this is a union made in heaven, if there ever was one. But I wonder, as the market continues to develop, obviously we have $50 billion worth of projects on the natural gas processing side on the Gulf Coast. We've got emerging LNG export from the United States. And you have an Asian natural gas price that is very attractive for sale. In other words, the competitive market for natural gas on a global scale and the increasing demands on U.S. natural gas for both domestic supply of natural gas plants, I mean, $50–60 billion worth of projects coming online in the next years, and the demand on the increasing opportunities to sell through LNG elsewhere. I wonder if at some point Mexico will need to not look at the competitive pricing signals only in terms of development of the country's domestic supply, because it may be that you have a circumstance where there's a potential building gap that storage has got to be part of the answer. Obviously, I think that's an excellent analysis and question. But it seems to me, I'd love to know what your analysts are saying about what's happening on the natural gas side, both in not just in Mexico, but also in all of North America.
Yes. Well, we believe that Mexico will be importing 6 or 7 BCFs, and we understand that the U.S. might be selling out also from LNG, maybe 8. So that the drain is considerable. Maybe up to 15 BCFs might be draining out of Texas. And that's important because the country here produces 75, right? So it's a substantial amount. I mean, 20% of the gas produced in the U.S. might be exiting through South Texas. I believe that's going to change the prices within the United States. I think it already has started to do so, but substantially will do so. And that will mean that imported gas from Texas into Mexico will be a little bit more expensive, of course, than what it is today. And we understand that. I think we do need a space in which gas prices are at least above $4.50, so that we can start to develop the reserves in Mexico and to try to see if there is more reserves in shale, for example, in certain places in Mexico, build the infrastructure for that. So the challenge is there. We completely agree on your outlook. I believe that even without shale developments, within 6 years, Mexico will start to increase the amount of gas that it produces, and that will start to curb off the imports, but it will not turn them around until 20–25 years, as I see it.
And I'd like to add that when the discussion of the reform was in course, one of the points that were discussed in those days were precisely that if we in Mexico were aware that we will have to be consistent with the opening of the market, and that means that we will be consistent with the benefits, but also with the effects of the full integration with the North American market, and one of those effects will be the price conditions. So, and a very precise answer is that the price will be the price will be your buffer to deal with all those new demands and new movements of the gas outside not only the US, but the North American. In Mexico, for example, some firms are interested in building liquefaction plants to export LNG.
So we have time just for one more question. George, do you want to?
Hi, thank you. I'm George Baker. I'm a market analyst. David, in relation to the uptick in domestic natural gas production in the next 6 years, do you see it that gas prices from producers in Mexico will be open prices, open market, or do you think the government will one way or another want to tie it into the kind of formula pricing that is currently in the contracts that are issued by CNH? I think that's a very important question because the way we look at it, to have a real gas market in Mexico, you need to have Mexican gas at market prices, not at formula prices. Do you have any insight? And I know it's outside your scope, but do you have some insight about that? Thank you.
Well, I don't have an insight, to be honest. And I particularly think this is a hard question because it goes into other administrations. But I think the whole set of people who have been working in the ministry, in CNH, in CRE, in Senagas, in Senace, are all committed to moving towards the market. Whether we will be able to hold that as time goes by and new administrations come in, it's a big question. It's very hard to answer. But I believe that that's the intention, and that's where we're trying to move to. And hopefully we'll find a way in which those people who produce gas in Mexico will be facing market prices, else we'll be creating huge distortions in the system.
Thank you, David. Well, thank you. That's the time's up. Thank you for your participation. So if you could remain seated for the next panel, please.